Africans can continue to expect more load shedding this year, but it may not be at the frequency seen last year, as the power utility had a record 51 days of load shedding. More units at various power stations are expected to undergo maintenance this year, including the very reliable Koeberg nuclear power plant, and Eskom says these are necessary intervention. Eskom Group Chief Executive André de Ruyter joins us now to talk about the state of the Eskom system as per their briefing today. Thank you very much, André, for joining us. January 15, the month that you are on, marks 2 years since you are at the helm of Eskom. I think it's fair enough to ask you the question, how do you think you have fared with your team since you took the reins?
Thanks, Kolani. And it's a fair question, and it's a good time for reflection. I think if we look at our operational performance, we have made some progress, not enough. We're not satisfied with the performance of our generation stations. So we need to do more maintenance work there. Unfortunately, as we do this maintenance work, we take those units out, they do increase the risk of load shedding. From a balance sheet perspective, we've been able to reduce the debt by some 80 billion, more to come. We've improved the income statement. The outlook for the end of the financial year is for a very considerable improvement on our income statement. We've managed to deliver the legal separation of our transmission business, a very important milestone on the road to restructuring Eskom. And then finally, I think we've made progress on the culture of the organization to drive a high-performance culture that is ethical and that is characterized by good governance. So all in all, about as far along as I would have dared to hope at this stage of the game, bearing in mind that, of course, this is a very large ship to turn around, even though I've got a very capable team assisting me in this effort.
André, what, in your view, would be the perfect balance? Would it be a healthier balance sheet or fewer hours of load shedding? Right now, for you, what are you wishing for in terms of finding that sweet balance in terms of those two?
Kolani, my first priority, if I could have a magic wand to fix all of Eskom's problems, would be to put the scourge of load shedding behind us. It is something that I think is very negative for the country's mood and morale. I think it's something that reflects poorly on Eskom. So that is where our focus is. So if we have to prioritize, then definitely load shedding.
You have already said that you will require between 4,000 and 6,000 megawatts to actually mitigate against all those interventions that you're talking about in terms of making sure that you take off some unit for maintenance. But have you made any suggestions to the stakeholders in government as to how you can get this 6,000 almost megawatts into the grid during that time quickly, because we already know it's going to happen?
That's a great question. So the way that power procurement works in South Africa is that the procurement is done by the IPP office, which sits in the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. Eskom is the buyer of electricity, so we take the contract that's negotiated by the IPP office, and provided that we are satisfied that it doesn't compromise Eskom as an entity, we then sign that. Now, the IPP office has been making very good progress on bringing additional megawatts onto the grid. They've recently announced the preferred bidders for bid window 5. Those costs have come in at remarkably low prices, which augurs well for the cost of electricity going forward. And they are about to launch bid window 6. So I do think that the government, and in particular the IPP office, understands the message that we've been giving them, that we have this capacity gap, and they are putting out all the stops to bring additional capacity onto the grid as soon as they can.
A very important discussion on this one, Andre, when it comes to the issue of non-payment. If it's not municipalities that are not paying, it's other customers. And that's a huge, huge issue. When I sat with you more than a year ago, you said if everybody in South Africa paid for what they used, Eskom would be in a much better financial position. Where are we when it comes to the issue of non-payment? As we heard today, the city of Tshwane also owes upwards of 600 million rands to the power utility.
That's correct, Gulani. You know, if you take a look at the outstanding overdue municipal debt, sitting now currently at about 43 billion rand, that's more than 10% of our total debt. So we could reduce our debt by 10% just if the municipalities were prepared to pay. Now, we understand that we can't cut off the power to those municipalities because there are many ratepayers and electricity consumers, businesses, industries in those municipalities who religiously pay their bills. The problem really lies with the municipalities. Where we have business customers and industrial customers that we supply directly who don't pay us, the option is very simple. We cut them off and we only reconnect them once the overdue debt has been paid. But with municipalities, it's a far more delicate situation, particularly because we are constrained by a number of court decisions and interdicts from cutting electricity to those defaulting municipalities. Ultimately, I think this requires a political solution, political accountability to be taken by the councillors in those municipalities, and then we can hopefully start to generate the revenue that is also necessary for us to compensate Eskom for the costs incurred in generating that electricity.
Andre, as we speak right now, many communities are in the dark, many complexes are in the dark, they are part of municipalities. Do you have any, when it comes to the solutions to the problem of non-payment and the historical debt, what solutions do you have for them right now as they sit in the dark in their complexes when body corporates are not getting the money, they are not paying it forward, therefore, no, you're not getting it from the municipalities? What solutions do you have for them?
One of the solutions that we are proposing to National Treasury is for National Treasury to use some of the already budgeted cash injections that are classified as equity, to rather use that to retire some of the outstanding municipal debt. That has no impact on Treasury per se, but it definitely will have a positive impact on the municipalities as well as on Eskom's income statement. And the attraction of a solution like that, of course, is that those municipalities who are so far behind in paying Eskom simply have very little chance of digging themselves out of that debt hole. So assistance from government would be required to help them, but at the same time, government doesn't have an infinite budget that it can expend on resolving the municipal debt issue. So we are engaging with National Treasury to find the solution. We think it's very workable. We think it's a very elegant one, and hopefully we can move forward with implementing such a solution.
Andre, many South Africans are asking themselves right now, Eskom, your organization, has made an application for a 20.5% tariff increase, which is above inflation, and it's something that is really going to put a lot of households under pressure. Why do you need 20.5% when it comes to those tariffs? And should we expect more applications such as those that are astronomical in the view of many South Africans this year?
We have sympathy with the South African consumer, also with South African industry and business, that if you had to pick a time to ask for an increase like this, it's hard to think of one that is less favorable. However, we are starting to have a carbon tax imposed in South Africa. And if we just look at the carbon tax as well as those IPP contracts that are already in place and the power that we already buy from those IPPs under contracts that were concluded some years ago, then that requires a 7.3% increase. This is before any of Eskom's historical costs that should have been awarded by NERSA decisions, where NERSA effectively kicked the can down the road by deferring increases in electricity tariffs. And unfortunately, those decisions have now come back to bite us collectively. And together, the cumulative effect of all of these elements, together with our own very limited cost increases, I have to say we've been very prudent in managing our costs over the past year, that arrives then at this 20.5% increase. Without that, unfortunately, we are in a position where we cannot, for example, pay a carbon tax. We cannot pay for the electricity produced by the independent power producers, or we run into issues with paying for the own costs that we incur. So it is a very tough number to swallow. We fully recognize that. But we also believe that once you start unpacking this 20.5% number, it becomes apparent that we are now at that point where we as South Africa have to implement cost-reflective tariffs. If you convert the tariff to American cents, at 16 Rand to the dollar, let's be a little bit generous when it comes to the exchange rate, then that works out at about 8 to 9 dollar cents per kilowatt hour. In the US, the average tariff is about 11 US cents per kilowatt hour. And if you compare our tariffs, even after this increase, to our competitors globally, China, India, even countries in Africa, Rwanda, and let's not mention Nigeria because they have a very poorly performing grid. Even after this increase, our electricity tariffs are certainly in the lower third of global comparable tariffs. So yes, it's a hard ask and it's a tough one to swallow, but unfortunately, we either have to recover this higher cost from the consumer, or we have to go to the taxpayer, and we know what the situation is as far as the fiscus is concerned.
Andre, before I let you go, you have experienced over 2,700 incidents of vandalism or sabotage and are spending tens of millions of rands to make sure that you protect the infrastructure, and you have now deployed 450 security guards to protect that infrastructure. What dimension does it now include into what you have to do and manage in terms of Eskom? Because this is almost something that is new. And do you think the sabotage itself is the right word? Because it suggests that there is conspiracy behind what is happening at some of these Eskom plants.
I've been very careful to avoid using the word sabotage until late last year when that incident happened close to the Letaba power station, where 4 stays of a distribution line were clearly cut simultaneously, and that doesn't happen by accident. So for the first time, we had incontrovertible evidence of sabotage. And that does make it more difficult. And really, we've got to appeal to South Africans to please bring these incidents of vandalism and sabotage to the attention of the law enforcement authorities, that we can combat this scourge. It is in no one's interest except those who are interested in disrupting electricity supply for whatever reason that might be.
André de Ruyter, Group Chief Executive at Eskom, telling us that sabotage is real and is here while they are dealing with the specter of load shedding that recorded a record of 51 days in 2021. This new dimension has brought in a spanner in the works.